Welcome to everyone to this section about legal enforcement and punishment. I want to thank to Sheila and Cesar for organizing this event. And we have gathered to debate about the legal implication of the COVID for understanding law in society. And criminal law and punishment have been used to address some of the social issues that arose in the pandemic. For instance, here in Chile, there is now a debate to increase the punishment for those who break the lockdown. The government has not been able to control the movement of part of the population, people who daily leave their home to earn their livelihood, so the criminal law is coming for help. Also, the pandemic has exposed the dire condition of our prison and has confronted us with new challenges. There are urgent measures to take if we don't want to transform prison sentence in death penalty sentence. To talk about this issue, we have two exceptional speakers. So let me introduce first to Olga Espinoza. She's a lawyer with a master's degree in law at the University of Sao Paulo, Brazil. She's a PhD candidate in social science at the University of Chile, where she's studying the link between violence and the prison management. She's a lecturer at the School of Public Affairs at the University of Chile, where she teaches public policy in criminal justice, prison system, and citizen security issues. Some of her recent publications are about women in prison, human rights in the criminal system, and reintegration of former detainees. Her presentation is called Crisis of COVID-19 Behind Bars in Latin America. So welcome, Olga. And our second speaker is Dr. Frieder Dünkel. He's a previous president of the European Society of Criminology and previous dean of law and vice-rector of the University of Greifswald. There he was teaching criminology, penology, juvenile justice, and criminal law in the Faculty of Law. He has conducted many research projects. These include international comparative projects of men prison in the countries around the Baltic Sea, on women imprisonment in Europe, of long-term imprisonment in 10 European countries, on youth violence, on juvenile justice system in Europe. So recent publications are prisoner resettlement in Europe, electronic monitoring in Europe, the monitoring of prison in German law and practice. His speech is about Corona crisis and its impact on prison life and penal policy in Europe and the world. Myself, my name is Irarrázabal. I will be the moderator with Karina Uribe. I am a researcher in social science in the University of O'Higgins, and Karina is a lecturer in international law in Valparaiso University, and she will introduce some rules for our conversation. Karina?
Okay. Hi, everyone. Hi, Olga. Hi, Frieder. Really nice to meet you. So I'm going to give you the rules of the debate. So each speaker will have 20 minutes for her or his presentation. So I will be receiving the questions in the chat, and I let them know to the speakers at the end of your presentations. So if we have time, and Sheila told me that we can hear the short comments or questions, but in that case, we will give some minutes for the people to ask you directly, okay? So that are the rules, and I don't know, I'm very excited to hear your presentations.
So Olga first.
Thank you. I will try to share my, yes, that's right. So thank you, Sheila and Cesar, for the invitation and the organization of this webinar. I want to apologize for the problem you are going to perceive in my accent, but I think you will be able to understand me. Latin America, please next. Can you share? Yes. Latin America is a scenario with many differences, even in prisons. Differences related to the organization of the correctional system, differences related to the institutional dependency of prison systems, to the profile of correctional staff, or to the control or not of criminal organization in relation to the prisons. However, even recognizing these differences, in the majority of systems, it's possible to observe high levels of overcrowding, poor hygiene, substandard living conditions, and limited availability of quality healthcare, which make prisoners and staff uniquely vulnerable to disease such as COVID-19. To share with you the complexity of this context, I will quote the next description. Open and badly treated wounds, food scraps on the floor of the cells, rat faces, poor air circulation, water rationing, insects everywhere. While some inmates don't even get out of their beds, given their weakness, others remain in wheelchairs. The possibility of bathing, washing your hands, or disinfecting any object only occurs through a few jets of water coming from a pipe in the wall, which are stored in improvised containers. In a place like this, where the smell is unbearable, one prisoner showed us the stitches on the badly stitched wound. Another young man, unable to get out of bed, describes his pain due to tuberculosis. These conditions are not an exception. On the contrary, they are constitutive of the prison reality in Brazil and other Latin American and Caribbean countries. And if the image described is already intolerable, it becomes frightening when it is identified as referring to a makeshift infirmary in a provisional detention center on the outskirts of Sao Paulo, Brazil. Being aware of the context of the prison system, it is possible to elaborate the following list of problems linked to it. Problems related to the criminal policy. Criminal policy manifested as punitive policies, policies based on risk, or policies based on drug policies. There are a lot of researches related to this point, Latin American researchers. These problems have provoked high prison population rates and strong overcrowding, which has maintained steady growth in most countries, as you can see. But at the same time, it's possible to see high level of pretrial detainees. We have a lot of countries with a percentage higher than 50% of pretrial detainees in our prisons. At the same time, it's possible to see, in relation to the implementation of this kind of policies, a progressive increase of female prisoners. Female prisoners that in a lot of countries has an important percentage, no lower than 15, but an important percentage that have been increasing during the last years in Latin America. But there are other problems related to the management of the system that we can observe in the lack of information and little transparency, reduced financial and human resources, few labor and educational programs, poor health and low assistance, and limited basic human conditions in general, but at the same time, high level of violence from prisoner to prisoner, prisoner to staff, staff to prisoners. And another important topic is related to criminal gangs control of prisons. We can say the overcrowding in Latin American countries is an important problem that we can to be aware. However, at the same time, it's not easy to have systematic information about what really happens inside prisons, because the access is often restricted. Few institutions visit or monitor the conditions of detention, as well as staff difficult working conditions to produce information. And in general, because prison doesn't usually matter much to politicians, authorities, and society in general. After all, we can assume that the pandemic scenario has forced authorities to put attention to especially vulnerable sectors as prisoners, because of the lethality that it can imply for some of them. But for the risk such prisons outbreaks would undermine ongoing efforts in the community to reduce contagion. In this sense, adopting concerted and urgent measures to deal with overcrowding and coronavirus in prisons is a decision that benefits the society as a whole. I would like to pay attention to measures taken by countries, but before it's important to understand some important recommendations that have been proposed by some international organizations of human rights related specifically to prison in this pandemic moment. Organizations like the High Commissioner of United Nations of Human Rights, or the United Nations Office Against Drug and Crime, the Inter-American Human Rights Commission, the World Health Organization, or the Latin American Institute of United Nations Against the Crime. So, are some of the institutions that have made specific recommendations about what governments have to do in this pandemic time. But there are also some international NGOs, Penal Reform International, International Amnesty, Human Rights Watch, etc., that have made important suggestions to state to develop policies in line with human rights. These institutions have emphasized the need to ensure health care and preventing measures against contagions, reduce the prison population to avoid the spread of COVID-19, promote immediate or early release of certain groups of offenders, avoid prison sanctions for administrative offenses that, as Paz says, it's a strong discussion now in Chile, and implement measures in a transparent manner, emphasizing the necessity of developing a fluid communication with inmates. And in general, they have sought to guarantee security, health, and dignity. Observing these recommendations, we can affirm that all Latin American countries have implemented different actions aimed at dealing with the various problems that have been arising as a consequence of expansion of the outbreaks of this disease. We can identify in a global point of view actions related to decongestion actions, focus in the reduction of prison population. In this group of procedures, we can find actions devoted to strengthen pre-release benefits as parole, weekend release, or war release, to implement extraordinary norms that free important groups of people as pardons or amnesties, and actions aimed at reducing the entrance of pre-trial detainees. Other kind of actions are the sanitary actions, focused in the control and or in the reduction of the expansion of the virus between prisoners and correctional staff. Some examples are the restrictions to personal visits, for example, the access to health products, the promotion of preventing campaigns, influenza vaccination, or the identification of places to isolate infected people. And finally, it's possible to see linkage measures focused in maintaining the relationship between inmates and their relatives, but between inmates and their lawyers and other actors who support them. Some examples are, for example, the permission to use cell phones, the organization of video calls through the internet, establishing protocols for communication with prisoners' families, and coordinating activities with prison monitoring bodies. In order to collect formal rigorous information about the impact of COVID-19 in prisons of the region, many academics and experts who make up the Latin American Society of Criminology were invited by the Center for Latin American Studies on Insecurity and Violence, CELIV, which is an Argentinian university center, to systematize information and achieve a first picture of what the impact was and how the prison system in the region have reacted to the pandemic. The process gathered information from official sources, and when it was impossible to obtain it or where it was of dubious credibility, secondary sources were used. This process of collection include the 3 federal countries that we have in Latin America: Brazil, Mexico, and Argentina, and other 15 countries. In total, the report integrates data from the prison system of 18 countries. In particular, it seeks to evaluate the effect that COVID-19 has had on inmates and prison staff, how the justice system has intervened, what effects have been on life within the prison walls, whether there have been riots and violence, and what the effects have been of restriction on visits and contacts between inmates and the outside world. This will be a photograph of what will surely be a long film that we hope to continue. The report remarked the severity of prison crisis in Latin America according to the levels of overcrowding that, as we saw, are far higher than the world average. Almost all countries have more prisoners than quotas, and in some cases, overcrowding exceeds 200% or more. Thus, the COVID arrived at this prison system, stripping away its great fragilities and accelerating different conflicts. To the overcrowding, the scarcity of resources and goods, is added the health challenge of attending to vulnerable population, establishing new protocols that restrict the essential communication of prisoners with their families, and extending the fear of a massive contagion that put pressure on the already precarious health system of the countries in the region. The reports incorporate different important topics, but one of them that I would like to expose with more detail is in relation of the population at risk. There is a significant percentage of inmates who are particularly vulnerable to COVID-19. According to an official classification, these groups are those over 68 years old, those prisoners with pre-existing health problems, primarily respiratory, hepatitis, diabetes, etc., or who are immunodeficient. Some countries also included in this category pregnant women or women with small children. The data that we collected indicate that more than half of the systems have more than 5% of their population defined as at risk. The report also includes the first steps taken by every country. The majority of the countries has been restricting measures to prevent inmates contact with the outside world. And they are explaining with a lot of details in the report. But it includes also the effects related to custodians and administrative staff who are strongly susceptible to contagion. It includes complaints and riots, as understood as initial reactions focused on three main areas. The first one, to permits for greater contact with family members, since they actually provide many of the goods that the inmates consume, food, clothing, or even drugs. Second, fear of contagion and lack of instrument for personal protection. And third, better living conditions. That has been the reason of the majority of complaints and riots in our region. And finally, the report also integrates information related to measures related to pre-release and justice participation. For the region, it is estimated that less than 2% of prisoners have obtained these release benefits. So their effect on reducing overpopulation pressure has been minimal. In conclusion, it has been possible to observe various efforts by the authorities to control contagion and its effects, mainly by reducing and isolating the prison population. However, these actions haven't prevented the spread of contagion, partly because of prison conditions, health limitations, sanitation, shortage of hygiene products, drinking water, etc., but also because of the management of problems. In addition, the complexity of the health crisis has highlighted a series of structural problems afflicting the prison systems, relating both to life inside the prisons and to the livelihood of those living the system. An important reflection of the latter is the significant number of inmates who, despite having been benefited from the pardon, rejected the option of freedom or requested re-entry into the prison. This pandemic, therefore, challenges us to devise comprehensive, efficient, and democratic public responses that aim to be sustainable solutions. Thank you very much. And I would like to finish my presentation putting this very interesting picture from Penal Reform International that described that prison is not place for a pandemic. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Olga, for this presentation. A little depressing, but we need to talk about this issue. And now I would like to invite to Professor Dünkel to do his presentation.
Hello. I just try to open my PowerPoint. So, thank you for inviting me for this webinar. I'm a researcher at the University of Greifswald in Germany, and I am interested since a long time in prison research and in particular also to how to change the policy of imprisonment and overuse of imprisonment and so on. So in my first slide, I do not show all my slides because they are more text which you can read afterwards, or which you can have available for further discussions also. And it's self-evident that in my introduction I just state as a statement about how COVID-19 has found its way into the prisons, and in particular in those states or countries, I would say, who have bad management of the pandemic. Also in prisons we have a lot of problems, whereas in contrast other countries, and in particular some European countries, have widely avoided infections. As you can see, one could, Germany, Czech Republic, Austria, Croatia, Slovenia, and others have avoided infections as far as I can see, and or only very low numbers of infected prisoners or infected staff members. However, the impact of the pandemic was restrictions of laws of rights of prisoners, for example, for having visits, restrictions of outdoor or out-cell activities, and many countries, and this is the better part of the story, have also stopped executing short sentences of imprisonment, as they recognize that they create a huge influx of new inmates, increasing the risk of infection. The major problem worldwide is the situation of prisons, as we have just heard from the Latin American report. Increasing prison population rates and high proportions of overcrowding in regions, particularly in Latin America, as we have seen. In Europe, the situation is quite different, at least what the increase of prison population rates is concerned. And we have, as we can see here, a situation that a variation of prison population rates, as we know from since long time, that in Eastern Europe we have higher rates of imprisonment, and recently also Turkey, with its autocratic political system, has increased its prison population rates tremendously. By the way, they have announced to release 90,000 prisoners, which would be 1/3 of the prison population. I have no idea if this has really happened. The same was in the United Kingdom, and where in England they said 4,000 prisoners should be released, and finally only 33 were released. So some announcements are not always fitting to the reality. So what you see here, somehow divided picture. Eastern Europe, higher prison population rates, and also somehow Spain, Portugal, France, and England, Wales. And then there is the middle of Europe with close to the Scandinavian low incarceration rates. Traditionally, Scandinavian exceptionalism on sentencing and imprisonment is quite remarkable. What is interesting is the development since the last almost 40 years. We have since about 2005 or so, say 2008, decline of the prison population rates in many countries, and this is would be a separate seminar to talk about that. And the reasons I have published about some of the reasons, and sometimes it is a political decision, the will to reduce prison population rates. Sometimes it's just reflecting declining crime rates and convicted offenders rates, particularly violent offenders. So we should then, this is the Western European part, and we have also Eastern European prison population rates, with this amazing reduction in Russia by more than 50% since about beginning of the 2000s. So, and all Baltic states have, and in these cases, it's a real, in Estonia, for example, it's a political will to reduce prison population rates. The result is that the occupancy rate, that means the number of prisoners per 100 places, is in most European countries below 100. So that means no overcrowding. Exceptions: France, Turkey recently, and Italy, Greece, Romania, Hungary. And so we have a quite, compared to what we have seen from Latin America, quite relaxed situation. I have some slides also on Latin America, and I don't want to repeat that because Olga has already presented the data. So I jump just through this. One remarkable thing we should maybe discuss: why is the development so contrary to Europe, with a strong increase in Brazil, in Panama, Costa Rica, which means that sometimes the population rate has tripled or doubled, and with the exception of Chile and Mexico, with a somehow stable situation. I have, maybe Olga has some explanations for that. Somehow it is also a kind of the political system, a question of governing the poor or discriminating poor people and so on. So the overcrowding rates are, this you can read later, overcrowding is almost everywhere in Latin America, as we have seen. So coming back to Europe and the international recommendations, the Council of Europe has expressed its concerns about COVID-19 and issued some statements about, which asked the member states to reduce the prison populations, and that all restrictions of prison life activities and contacts should be proportional and nevertheless allow an acceptable minimum level of contact. So some compensating measures for restricting personal visits are free of charge phone calls, video calls, and so on. And it also, the Council of Europe also recommended immediate or early release of certain groups of offenders, and to prepare them, and also to guarantee medical support. The Committee for the Prevention of Torture, the CPT, also emphasizes that measures should be proportionate, respectful of human dignity, and restricted in time, and concerted efforts to resort to alternatives to deprivation of liberty should be imperative, in particular in situations of overcrowding also. Then I have added some further statements of the UN Human Rights Office, which I do not go into the details now, but all of them in the same line. We have to look for reducing prisoner population rates, and also to release certain groups of offenders who are highly vulnerable or highly risk population. Now I come to the initiative we started in the beginning of April. First, we tried to, well, you have to say that Germany is a federal state, as you might know. We have 16 federal states, 16 prison laws, and 16 administrations of prisons and probation services. And so we were concerned about what is happening inside prisons, and how the different prison administration cope with pandemic challenge. And also our impetus was naturally to see what, under human rights perspectives, has been done, explore the possibilities for also for a wider change in penal policy, from a reductionist policy perspective. That means we are interested in reducing, also in Germany, although we have a very low prison population, the prison population further. Germany, as you can see here, Greifswald is in the northeast. We are in the Mecklenburg, Western Pomeranian federal state. And so these are the 16 federal states you can see. And the situation in Germany in general, prison population is about 77 per 100,000. So it's close to the low Scandinavian rates. And a reduction of about 20% last 10 years or 15 years. And what is important, 3/4 of the population are accommodated in single cells, so we don't have these communal cells as we've seen in the pictures of Olga also, where many prisoners are in one room. So prisoners are at night in their own rooms, only 1/4 are sharing a cell with one other or maybe two others. The occupancy rate is about 87%, so overcrowding is not really a problem. However, we have the problem in Germany as fines are the main criminal sanction in our system. 84% of the convicts receive a fine, and some of them cannot pay or are not able to pay. And as a substitute sentence, we have then fine default detention. That means 30-day fines go for 30 days of imprisonment. So we have per day about 10% of the adult prison population in day fine or day fine default detention. That means these people have should not be anyway in prisons. They should pay their fine. And what we saw was immediately the stopping of incarcerating such people. So these 4,000 are now out of prison. 4,000 per day means that about 50,000 per year go through the system. And this is the great danger, that we have a high influx of very short prison sentences. We have also this problem of visits have been stopped, but internet access and some video conferences, Skype and so was introduced. So a thing which was unthinkable before the crisis, because internet or handy mobile phones, and so that was not allowed at all in German prisons. There are also some changes in of long-term leaves. We have that in our laws, that in the last part of the sentence, that prisoners up to 6 months can be at home, in home detention somehow, or be outside prison in order to reintegrate and to have their work activities outside of the prison. All this has been stopped, and so quite a lot of problems arose from that. So that was the first part of our project, to look at Germany. And then in the mid of April, we started then to look at worldwide, and as I know, I have a lot of colleagues everywhere in the world of doing prison research. We started asking them for giving us short reports about what is happening in their countries. And so we have about 50 countries covered. Also Chile, it's Álvaro Castro Morales from your university, Olga, who is involved in this project with some of his colleagues. And yeah, and we saw some developments also in Europe, that prisoners have been locked up in their cells for 23 hours per day in some areas. which is seen by the CPT as torture. And so we are really concerned about this. Yeah, so what I have done here in this presentation, and I think we won't have the time to go throughout all this, I have just given you some examples of what has happened in Austria and other countries. And for example, and it's always somehow the same. They have stopped new entries into prison as far as possible, reprieving sentences of up to 3 years in Austria. The same also in Germany. We have stopped all these fine default sentences. We have also stopped incarcerating people convicted up to 1 year or up to 3 years in a few federal states. Same in Austria. And they have, Belgium, again, also same, releasing some prisoners who had already been in somehow open regimes, or they've released all elderly prisoners. Release means that they have not, there's no pardon for the sentence. It could be that after the crisis they have to serve their sentence. It's only a suspension of the executing of prison sentences. But some forms is the release 6 months earlier in Belgium is a real definite release for these people. So I don't know if I have how much time I have, but so you see here some other examples from Croatia and Czech Republic, and interestingly, in the Czech Republic, the Supreme Court has asked heads of regional courts not to impose prison sentences if it is not really needed. And also the Minister of Justice asked the courts to delay the execution of prison sentences of non-high risk offenders. In Denmark, rather harsh changes inside prisons with locking up prisoners in the cells alone half of the time. That's quite considerable. And if you know about Danish prisons, they are normally very liberal and very open inside, many contacts between the prisoners. So this is a strong change of their prison policy for the moment. But also the judges try to release early pre-trial prisoners. Finland, another case study, but it's, I can say it's all the same direction to not to execute unpaid fine sentences, fine default detention. And remarkably, in France, they have expanded the system of home detention and of early release, and have released about 10,000 prisoners. As I have mentioned before, they had a high overcrowding, one of the few countries in Europe with a large overcrowding population. And so this has helped probably to alleviate these problems. Okay. Netherlands, same, not executing certain sentences, and only 15% of, or 85% are now in a single cell during night, and so they have also released many prisoners.
Sorry, Professor Dünkel.
I should finish,
yes,
huh?
please.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So what is the consequence also from looking at other countries? We should, and this was my final idea also, take the corona crisis to as a chance to reflect restriction of prisoners' rights with regards to the principle of proportionality. All rights should be given back someday, and all interventions should be proportional. And we should reflect the overuse of imprisonment and towards the reductionist strategy. Having this in mind, we have to face that at the moment, all what we know about effective intervention and effective resettlement, which I have described in this book, or we have described in this book on prisoner resettlement, are not working effectively at the moment, because sentence planning and preparation for release through opening the prisons, through prison leaves and other measures in order to get prisoners used to a normal life outside prisons are not working satisfactorily at the moment because of the pandemic. So we should, what we have now decided is having 50 reports or 15 pre-reports about the situation under the pandemic and worldwide. We would like to use these reports and extend them, and this is also an invitation to you and other scholars who are interested to be part of a worldwide activity, publishing a book on the impact of coronavirus in prison conditions. We have submitted this book proposal to Routledge, and these are the final chapters. You can see we have 50 national reports about some other comparative study, and this is what we try to do in favor of more rational and less imprisonment using policy in general. So this is what I have to present at the moment, and we can discuss that now. How do I get out?
Thank you so much. Thank you for the presentation. Very interesting to see what is going on in Latin America and also in Europe and the contrast. So, Karina?
Yes, well, thank you very much again for your presentations. And we invite to the attendees to make questions to the speaker. And I would like to make a question to both of you. So Olga and Frieder, both of you talked about the measures taken by the governments. However, my impression is that there is not a gender perspective in those measures. So what do you think about that? Or do you know a country which has implemented gender perspective in their public policies related with COVID-19 and prisons? And finally, I would like to share with you a case in Chile where a pregnant woman of twins she applied for a benefit to be released from the prison, and that benefit was rejected by the lower court because the judge said that there is not a law in the Chilean system which permits that benefit. However, the Court of Appeal revoked the decision, applying an international treaty, Belém do Pará, and finally, the Court of Appeal applied a gender perspective to give the benefit and release the woman from the prison or the jail. So again, do you know a gender policy related with this topic?
I think that this
okay.
Olga first, and then Frieder.
No, it's okay. Okay. Okay, thank you very much, Karina, especially because, as you said, or as you introduced, the main measures haven't had a gender perspective, absolutely. However, it's possible to see that some countries have included as vulnerable group some specific women's according to her motherhood, according to their motherhood. So it has been the more expressive way to introduce a kind of gender perspective. But if we think with more details, it's possible to find that even the preventing campaigns haven't had gender perspective. I remember a group of lawyers, women lawyers, criminologists or other professionals that organize a specific campaign to bring the products in female prisons, because the hygiene products that the government has been distributing around the prisons, around the prison system, haven't include hygiene female products, something so basic like that. So it's very important to try to incorporate in our discussion not only our local rules, our local legislations, but the Bangkok rules that or Belém do Pará rules, declarations that make a specific suggestion that it's important to recognize the conditions of the chief of a house, or that with your imprisonment could prejudice an important group, familiar group. So it's important to be open to different mechanisms of freedom for women who has motherhood as one of their conditions. I would let Frederick continue with this discussion.
Okay. I think I would have said somehow the same about the women and the pregnant and the women with children and women in general in prisons as a special vulnerable group. And I think there might not really be an explicit policy so much in Europe as far as I see, but they are considered to be released earlier, and they are in some countries, at least, also in at least what I know from Denmark, they are mostly in open prisons. So they are not in a closed institution, and those in open prisons during these times have been widely released as far as possible. So we have very few women in prison, and it's a very small group. And but you are right. We should collect data about what happened with this small group, and because they are in general not really dangerous people, they are just so that's why they can be granted so many relaxations of the regimes in open prisons and prison leaves and so on. So yes, that's a bit. But indeed, we need more facts. We need more research on what is happening with the different groups. Also with elderly prisons, everybody says yes, release them. But these elderly prisoners often are lifers. They're serving a life sentence, and they are getting old, and so it's not so easy maybe to just say over 65 they should be out of the prison. They risk more to be isolated in their departments where they are accommodated. So yeah, Okay, so far.
Yeah, thank you very much for your answers. So if anybody wants to make a comment or question, again, you are very welcome. Pass.
Yeah, but Professor Dünkel want to say something first.
I just wanted to ask Olga. Olga, my friend in Chile has told me that the government or prison administration considered only to release 1,300 prisoners. Did that happen, and why so few? I mean, this is about 3% of the prison population. There are not other prisoners being elected for release or not executing short prison sentences? That would be interesting because some governments are so reluctant with things they can do. They can give a remission of the sentence. They can decide on a pardon for certain groups of offenders. Did that happen in Chile?
Thank you for your question, Friedrich. Chile has one of the highest level of people released in this exceptional way. However, it wasn't the only way to release people. One of the traditional of the regular procedure to release people is through parole. Parole has been implemented recently, so a percentage of people has been have obtained their freedom through parole. But at the same time, the courts, criminal courts, have been reducing the people sending as pre-trial detainees. So in a whole, we can see that Chile has been releasing or reducing the entrance of prisoners in the highest way in Latin America, or through the highest, saying that the percentage is smaller if we compare with the whole prison population. And you remarked something that is very interesting, that because that is that the curve or the increasing of prison population rates in Chile has been reduced, and that happened. Well, there are a lot of reasons about that. One could be a very, very important fire that we have in one prison almost 9 years ago. But another important reason or explanation of that is that some years ago, 5 years ago almost, we reformed our alternatives to prisons. Our sentence that permit some people receive another kind of sentence, not specifically imprisonment. So with this inclusion, the rate of people with alternatives to prison increase and the rate of imprisonments decrease a little.
Thank you.
Karina, is fine. If I do my question.
You can do that, please.
Okay. No, I would like to ask if you think some of the measures that the government had taken for the pandemic, you think will stay, you know, if there are some measure like use of internet, of cell phone, that you think there is a possibility to keep them after the pandemic and to have a more, something like we learn about this process, that it could be kind of a more optimistic view of change that could have been provoked in this pandemic?
All right.
Okay, please, you, Friedrich.
Professor, yes.
Yes, that's one of the ideas we have in mind when starting our initiative, that we can learn from this pandemic, that things can be done without being a risk for the order of the prison. For example, to have these video calls with families. And this was just starting in Germany to have these kind of conversations and telephone systems, in also telephones in the cells of the prisoners. We are doing that, we're starting that, and I hope that the pandemic will help to make this a normal practice in the future. Also having internet, naturally limited, but internet contacts with this is a debate in Germany right now. We have also changed in some of our laws. We have explicit strategy to further family contacts via internet and other contacts, and family-friendly prison as a principle of organizing prisons, also in particular for those who are having a family or having children, and to increase the number of children's visits and so on. Mm-hmm. So this will be maybe possible after this crisis, that we can keep that. And also, it's my hope that we can totally or mostly avoid all these short-term imprisonment sentences of 6 months or less, which are largely practiced in quite a lot of countries, in France, in Switzerland, in Germany, although we have banned somehow short-term imprisonment, because we know about the negative impact of short-term imprisonment, losing jobs and losing the contact to the society, and after short time being outside again. So this revolving door system of short-term imprisonment should be abolished as far as possible, and alternative sentence should be widened for these people. So we also in Germany, we have a lot to do, and in Europe, although we have a better situation compared to Latin America, where there's less overcrowding, but we can do more. We can have more humane and less harmful prisons also in Europe. Okay, now.
Thank you. Olga, we have 2 minutes more, and then we need to close.
Thank you. I agree with Frieder, because governments in general has been investing a lot of money trying to separate the prison from the society, especially relating to cell phones, relating to different kind of communications from prisoners to families, or doing that to avoid criminal actions in general. But through this pandemic, through the possibility to use cell phones, to use video calls or any kind of connections, we have opened a strong possibility to connect prisoners, to connect prisons to society, but not society in a very general spectrum, but society in very specific spectrum. I am thinking, for example, the possibility to connect prisons with universities, prisons with civil society, civil organization, different kind of institutions. So if I am able to teach a lot of students through the Zoom mechanism, it will be possible to teach or to be in touch with prisoners in any place. So I think that this is a very, very important point that has been opened by this pandemic.
Okay, thank you so much for your answers, and thank you, Karina. Thank you for the organizers, and yes, we don't have time to close this, but I think we need to learn what is going on in this situation, how the pandemic has highlighted the terrible condition of our prison and the opportunities we also need to grab about from this experience. So thank you so much to all for your participation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you all.